Welcome. Today, we are undertaking an in-depth exploration into the life of a figure whose story is just so deeply intertwined with the modern Australian resource boom,
Mm.
and at the same time, with one of the nation's most notorious family dramas. We're talking about Langley Frederick George Hancock, who lived from 1909 to 1992.
He was, the quintessential Australian mining magnate.
He really was.
His biography, it reads like a legend. It's truly a tale of two vastly different extremes.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
Well, on one side, you had this entrepreneurial force, the
Yeah.
man who discovered and monetized, unimaginable mineral wealth in these remote, desolate regions of Western Australia.
And in doing so, he forever changed the nation's economy.
Absolutely. But then on the other side, his later years were just completely defined by a private life that spiraled into a highly public, very bitter, and decade-long legal and personal conflict.
Okay, let's break this extraordinary life down. We're going to focus on the two main pillars of his fame.
Mm.
First, there's that incredible, almost mythical business achievement, discovering what is consistently cited as the world's largest iron ore deposit in 1952.
And that one act, that single discovery, instantly made him one of Australia's wealthiest individuals.
And more than that, it crucially, fundamentally altered the economic trajectory of the entire country.
It's a monumental business achievement, no question. But that second pillar is the sheer intensity of the personal controversy that surrounded him, especially in his sunset years.
And that all centers on his third marriage, right?
It does, specifically to Rose Porteous, née Loxon, who was his much younger former maid from the Philippines. That conflict, particularly with his only acknowledged child, Gina Reinhardt, was just so bitter.
So bitter that it didn't just end with his death.
Not at all. The legal and personal battles, as our sources indicate, they continue to overshadow his legacy for more than a decade afterward.
So we have this central figure, Lang Hancock, at the nexus of what? Geology, massive wealth, and political power. What does it actually mean to be an Australian iron ore magnate during this specific historical period, the mid to late 20th century?
Well, you have to think about the context. When Hancock was coming of age, Australia's vast inland mineral resources were generally people knew there was stuff out there.
But they were inaccessible.
Exactly. Politically and economically inaccessible. The global demand, especially from an industrializing Asia, was only just beginning to ramp up. And critically, the political framework to exploit these resources on a massive export scale. It just wasn't there yet.
And this is where Hancock becomes such a pivotal figure.
Precisely. Hancock's story is absolutely critical because he was the individual who provided the literal key, the largest deposit in the world.
But it wasn't just finding it.
No, and this is so important. He then possessed the tenacity and, frankly, the sheer financial muscle to fight the decade-long political battles that were necessary to pry open that export economy.
So his success didn't just enrich his own family.
It did far more. It reflected, and you could even say it drove, a massive shift toward recognizing and treating Australia's remote mineral wealth as globally significant. His initial discovery, followed by his furious lobbying to lift the federal iron ore embargo, it fundamentally restructured the nation's relationship with its raw materials and repositioned Australia on the global economic stage.
Let's trace this journey right from its very start. Langley Frederick George Hancock was born on June 10, 1909, in Leederville, Perth, Western Australia.
He was the eldest of 4 children, and the family was just deeply embedded in the pastoral traditions of the Northwest.
So he was a man of the land from the beginning.
Absolutely. That family background, it provides the foundation for his later career. It gave him an intimate knowledge of the land that was far beyond what some city-based speculator would ever possess.
And his father?
His father, George Hancock, bought Mulga Downs Station, and Langley spent his formative years deeply involved in the family station run at Ashburton Downs.
So this wasn't a family that just arrived on the scene.
Not at all. The sources highlight that they had significant pioneering roots. For instance, his notable family links included his great-aunt Emma Withnell, who was considered a pioneer of the Gascoyne region.
And there was a military connection too, I believe.
Yes, his cousin, Sir Valston Hancock, was a high-ranking officer in the Royal Australian Air Force. So this was a family that was used to regional influence, used to making their own way in a very harsh environment.
His education followed a path that was, I suppose, typical for a child of a pioneering family who could afford it. It began at home.
Right, and then he eventually boarded at the St. Aloysius Convent of Mercy in Toodyay at the age of 8, and later attended the prestigious Hale School in Perth from 1924 to 1927.
Where he was quite sporty, played cricket and football.
A standard, privileged upbringing in that sense. But the real turning point, the one that sets him on his unique path, is what he did immediately after secondary school.
He didn't go to university.
No. He went straight back to Mulgatown Station to help his father manage the property. And this wasn't just a nostalgic return. This is where he developed the practical, deep-seated expertise and familiarity with the harsh Northwest terrain.
The skills that would later let him spot geological opportunities that other people just missed.
Exactly, those skills.
We should quickly cover his early personal life as well. His first marriage was in 1935 to Suzette Mailey.
They lived at Mulgadowns, but the marriage was short-lived, at least geographically. She returned to Perth, and the separation was formalized in 1944.
And 1935 was also a significant year for him professionally.
It was. The same year he officially took over the management of Mulgadowns from his father, which really signaled the launch of his independent career. And this business independence was immediately shared. He partnered with his old schoolmate, E.A. Peter Wright, in running the property.
And that partnership with Peter Wright, it became legendary, didn't it?
It absolutely did. The sources used this partnership to exemplify a very old-school, trust-based business ethos.
The famous handshake deal.
That's the one. They proudly noted that no deals between the two men were ever sealed with anything stronger than a handshake. This kind of relationship, founded on absolute mutual trust rather than, mountains of legal contracts, would underpin the immense fortune they later generated together. It speaks volumes about the business culture of the remote Northwest at that time.
Then came the Second World War, and he had a period of military service.
Yes, he served as a sergeant in a militia unit, the 11th Northwest Battalion Volunteer Defense Corps.
And following the war, his personal life became more stable.
It did. He married his second wife, Hope Margaret Nicholas, on August 4th, 1947. And this was the long, stable chapter of his life.
How long were they married?
They remained married for 35 years, right up until her death in 1983 at the age of 66. Hope was, of course, the mother of his only acknowledged child, Gina Reinhardt, and this marriage really provided the anchor for his decades of business success.
Before we move on from his early life, the source material does mention a complex detail that came to light much, much later.
Yes, and it's worth noting, just for completeness, in 2012, a woman named Hilda Kickett claimed to be Lang Hancock's illegitimate daughter.
What was the specific allegation?
The allegation was that he'd had an affair with an Aboriginal cook at Mulgadowns, which resulted in her conception. Now, the sources are very careful to state that these claims have not been corroborated.
But the existence of the claim itself is significant.
It is. It adds a layer of complexity and historical context to his relationships in the remote pastoral environment of the time, even if it remains unsubstantiated in the public record we are drawing from.
So long before the iron ore discovery that would cement his financial status, Hancock was already involved in mining. It seems he had a natural inclination for it.
It seems so. The sources suggest this was sparked by his uncle, John Hancock Jr., who was a keen prospector himself.
And this early curiosity led to his first major commercial resource involvement, one with a profoundly dark legacy.
There's a story, perhaps it's family lore, that Hancock allegedly discovered asbestos at Whitnum Gorge when he was only 10 years old.
At 10.
That's the story. Regardless of the exact age he found it, he certainly seized the opportunity. He staked a claim there in 1934 and officially began mining blue asbestos, known as crucidolite, in 1938 under the company Australian Blue Asbestos.
This is nearly 15 years before the Pilbara discovery. It's fascinating that he jumped into a resource that, at the time, was seen as valuable and modern.
But which we now know was a catastrophe. The contrast is stark. Crucidolite, the blue asbestos found at Whitnum, is chemically different and often considered more dangerous than white asbestos.
Why is that?
Its fibers are thinner, straighter, and can penetrate lung tissue more deeply. It was a globally sought-after high-grade material at the time.
And the operation quickly attracted the attention of a much bigger company.
Yes, CSR Limited, the massive colonial sugar refining company, which was diversifying its interests.
So how did that partnership evolve?
CSR purchased the majority of the claim in 1943. Hancock initially retained a significant 49% share, but he quickly grew dissatisfied.
Because CSR held the 51% majority?
And they acted like it. Hancock reportedly complained bitterly that they viewed their majority stake as a license to ignore his local knowledge and his management input. This frustration, likely compounded by their operational styles clashing, led him to sell the remainder of his stake in 1948.
So he completely exited the asbestos business well before the full scale of the health tragedy became clear.
He did, but the legacy of Whitnum Gorge became immense and heartbreaking due to hundreds of cases of asbestos-related diseases. And this is where the historical scrutiny falls heavily on Hancock's early knowledge.
It became a catastrophic industrial tragedy.
On an almost unimaginable scale, the mine, operating primarily after Hancock's exit, became a contamination disaster. The crucial point noted in the source material, which links back directly to Hancock, is that discovered company papers showed he was, to some degree, aware of the dangers of asbestos prior to selling his stake in 1948.
What specifically does the source material suggest about his awareness? Was it a general knowledge, or did it relate to the operational risks?
The implication of the discovered documents is that the risks were known to the owners, likely concerning things like dust mitigation or poor ventilation in the working conditions, the specific factors that lead to respiratory disease.
So even at that time, there was growing information about these dangers.
Growing, though not universally accepted, information about the dangers of dust inhalation in mining environments. But despite this implication of knowledge, the source is clear. Hancock never accepted any liability for the subsequent illnesses or deaths, nor have his companies since his death.
And what's the legal consequence of that position?
Well, it's a key legal detail. The source notes that as of 2017, which is a very recent benchmark considering the timeline, neither the Australian federal government nor the Western Australian state government had successfully pursued his companies, or by extension, his estate for damages related to the Whitnum catastrophe.
So he remained legally insulated.
Completely. It highlights a complex legal landscape where responsibility was dispersed, or perhaps just too difficult to prove in the context of the operational timeline and the eventual ownership by CSR. It's a powerful example of resource wealth creation being entangled with profound societal cost.
The Whitnum chapter fades as we move to the monumental event that defines his name, the claimed discovery of the world's largest iron ore deposit in the Pilbara region on November 16, 1952. This is where the legend is forged.
This story is fantastic, and it was often recounted by Hancock himself. It became a central pillar of his personal myth-making.
The famous flight.
Yes, he claimed he was flying low through the gorges of the Turner River because foul weather and low clouds forced him down while he and Hope were traveling from Nunyerry to Perth.
And the detail he provided is so vivid, describing the gorge walls looking like solid iron and being rusty looking. He said he immediately recognized the oxidized iron. The weather element made him sound like a true, rugged pioneer guided by instinct.
Exactly. It makes for a perfect narrative. But, as we've noted, this narrative is subject to intense historical dispute.
From the biographer Neil Phillipson.
Right. In his biography, Man of Iron, he challenged this famous anecdote. Phillipson's research, citing the Australian Bureau of Meteorology, argued that there was no rain in the Turner River area on November 16, 1952.
Or any day that entire month.
Or any day that entire month, which suggests the legendary story of being forced low by a storm might have been an embellishment, perhaps manufactured years later, to underscore the sheer ruggedness and independence of the discovery.
So the reality is less about an accidental landing and more about pure, astute geological observation.
That seems to be the case. Regardless of the weather, the scale of what he found was indisputable. He returned many times, tracing the ore body for 112 kilometers, or 70 miles, with his prospector partner, Ken McCamey.
And this leads to a fascinating historical footnote. Hancock was the man who found the specific, commercially viable deposit.
But geologist Harry Page Woodward had previously asserted the region's vast potential decades before. Woodward's 1890 annual General Report of the Government Geologist stated clearly that the region was essentially an iron ore country, with enough iron ore to supply the whole world.
So the potential was known for over 60 years. Hancock's contribution was the actionable discovery and, crucially, the political will to exploit it. Why was Woodward's assessment, which was so accurate, ignored for so long?
Well, two primary reasons. Firstly, in the decades leading up to the 1950s, development was simply uneconomic due to negligible overseas demand.
Right. Australian iron ore was mostly for domestic use.
Exactly. And secondly, and more critically for Hancock, there was government policy that intentionally restricted export.
Let's focus on that political obstacle, the embargo, because this is the crucible where Hancock's fortune met Australian federal policy.
It's the entire reason his story transcends mere geology. Development of deposits like Yampi Sound began after 1920, but the Commonwealth government, motivated by concerns about resource conservation, curtailed exports to Japan in 1938.
Setting a precedent for federal control.
It did. Then, in 1952, the very year of his discovery, the Western Australian government signed a binding agreement with BHP. This agreement reserved all known or unknown iron ore to the Crown for 9 years.
Why? What was the goal?
The goal was to encourage the establishment of a steel mill and smelter in Quina. The national priority was domestic steel production, not export revenue.
So Hancock finds the world's largest deposit, but the government had literally just locked up the resource to prioritize domestic industry. What was his reaction?
Fury, to put it mildly. The resource was legally locked away, effectively sterilizing his discovery for a decade. And this is where he shifts from being a prospector to becoming a powerful, relentless lobbyist.
Lobbying for how long?
He lobbied, as the sources put it, furiously for a decade to get that federal embargo lifted. This political struggle, not the flight, is the true test of his determination.
And eventually he succeeded.
He did. Limited approval for export from non-BHP deposits was finally granted in 1960. And within a year, in 1961, Hancock revealed his discovery and staked his claims.
That decade of lobbying and strategic waiting certainly paid off. How did he then move from staking the claim to achieving massive commercialization?
He needed colossal capital, something far beyond the capacity of his handshake partnership with Peter Wright. So in the mid-1960s, he revisited that partnership, and they collaborated with the global mining giant, the Rio Tinto Group.
Which gave them access to the infrastructure, the capital, the global export chains.
Everything they needed. And in a move that anchors the wealth to his family, Hancock named the development site Hope Downs after his second wife.
And this negotiation is what secured the family's long-term generational financial security, independent of the volatility and operational risk of actually running a mine. That's the key insight, isn't it?
It is the absolute key to their sustained riches. The deal was an act of financial genius. Under the terms, Rio Tinto set up and still administers the mine in the area. Wright and Hancock essentially walked away with a perpetual royalty stream.
Meaning they receive a percentage of the revenue from every single ton of ore extracted forever.
Forever, without bearing the massive capital expenditure, operational risks, or labor management headaches. They isolated themselves completely from the traditional risks of mining.
They became passive beneficiaries of a global supply chain.
Precisely. The sources indicate this structure generated annual royalties of $25 million, split evenly between the two men. This turned Hancock into a self-sustaining financial powerhouse almost overnight. By 1990, Business Review Weekly conservatively estimated Hancock was worth a minimum of $125 million, and that value was only ever going to grow.
The story transitions here from resource pioneer to political operator. Lang Hancock never sought formal political office, but the immense wealth he generated was channeled directly into political influence, driven by his deeply held conservative views.
His political action was almost entirely motivated by a single governing philosophy, keeping government out of his business. He started with his successful lobbying against the 1950s export restrictions.
Which established him as a force to be reckoned with.
It did. From then on, his influence was exerted through his personality, his public commentary, and, most effectively, via enormous financial donations.
He donated across the political spectrum, but where did his alignment truly lie?
His views aligned most closely with the Liberal and National parties of Australia, which typically advocate for smaller government and less regulation. He had a tight friendship with Queensland Premier Joe Bjelke-Petersen.
Himself a highly powerful, staunchly conservative figure.
Very much so. Hancock donated a substantial $632,000 to the Queensland National Party during Bjelke-Petersen's premiership, viewing him as an essential ally against federal interference. He also gave $314,000 to their Western Australian counterparts.
But the political maneuvering gets really fascinating and strategic in his home state of Western Australia, where he actively funded the opposition party.
This is a pivotal moment that demonstrates his anti-establishment approach. Hancock donated an astonishing $985,000 to the Western Australian Labor Party.
To put that in perspective, that's almost double what he gave the Nationals in WA.
And more than he gave his friend Bjelke-Petersen. When asked why he would fund a party generally associated with labor unions and regulations, he explained that at least labor can't do any harm.
What was the context of that massive, almost punitive donation?
Well, the sources explained that he had a severe and very public falling out with the sitting WA Liberal Premier, Sir Charles Court. Hancock perceived Court as being overly regulatory and interfering.
So his goal wasn't to support labor's ideology.
Not at all. It was purely to strategically disrupt the existing liberal power structure and keep Sir Charles Court's party out of power for as long as possible. It was political sabotage funded by mineral wealth, a very clear demonstration that his loyalty was only to the principle-least government.
And that philosophy was clearly articulated under oath, too.
It was his life's mantra. Before a state royal commission in 1991, he famously declared, "I have always believed that the best government is the least government." He was extremely skeptical of the state's positive role in commerce.
He said they couldn't help business.
Right. He stressed that while governments do not and cannot positively help business, they possess the power to be disruptive and destructive. Every political maneuver he made stemmed from this profound distrust of centralized authority.
His efforts weren't just philosophical, they extended to trying to influence specific national policy, even attempting to blacklist certain organizations and writers.
He was detailed and direct in his recommendations, using his influence with powerful allies. In 1977, he sent a telex, which itself suggests urgency and directness, to the then Treasurer of Australia, Sir Philip Lynch.
And what was his advice?
His advice was to stop money coming in to finance subversive activities, such as Friends of the Earth, which is a well-heeled foreign operation. He viewed environmentalism as a direct threat to resource extraction.
And he also recommended censorship.
He did. He suggested to Bill Peterson that the federal government should attempt to censor works by notable critics of capitalism, like Ralph Nader and the economist John Kenneth Galbraith, fearing that their ideas might wreck Fraser's government. He saw certain economic ideas as literal threats that required state suppression.
To further his own interests, he even tried to take control of the narrative by launching his own media venture.
In 1969, he and Peter Wright started publishing The Sunday Independent, a weekly newspaper in Perth. Their primary, stated objective was to further their mining interests and political advocacy.
How did that go?
The paper faced strong competition and is widely thought never to have turned a profit. Hancock largely relinquished his interest in the early 70s, realizing media was a difficult political tool.
And finally, his political passion culminated in bankrolling a secessionist movement for Western Australia.
This was the ultimate expression of his least government philosophy. He was a staunch advocate for Western Australia, separating from the Commonwealth.
There was a real sentiment in WA that they were getting a raw deal.
A very real sentiment that they contributed disproportionately to the federal budget through resource wealth without receiving reciprocal benefits or respect. Hancock bankrolled an unsuccessful secessionist party in the 1970s.
And he published a book on it.
In 1979, he published Wake Up Australia, making the case for secession. The significance of this advocacy was underscored by the book's launch, which was presided over by his daughter, Gina Reinhardt, and Premier Jill Peterson, signaling the alignment of his family and political allies in this extreme stance. As we continue to explore the public record of Lang Hancock's political life, we must now address the material in the sources concerning his most outspoken and deeply controversial views.
Particularly those regarding land rights and Indigenous Australians.
Yes, and we approach this material with strict impartiality, reporting only what the sources detail.
This material really highlights the intense, unyielding conflict between his philosophy of resource extraction and the growing movement for Indigenous land ownership and recognition in Australia.
That tension is absolutely central to understanding his political posture. Hancock is quoted in the source material as arguing that nothing should be sacred from mining, whether it's your ground, my ground, the blackfellow's ground, or anybody else's.
And he provided an economic rationale for this position.
A utilitarian one. He stated that mining in Australia occupies less than 1/5 of 1% of the total surface of our continent, and yet it supports 14 million people.
His conclusion from that was stark.
It was. The question of Aboriginal land rights and things of this nature shouldn't exist. This viewpoint clearly prioritized the nation's economic output and resource development above all other considerations of sovereignty or ownership.
That rationale firmly establishes the priorities that guided his business and political actions. The sources also detail a statement he made in a 1984 television interview that was profoundly shocking and generated significant controversy.
Yes. In that interview, he laid out a proposal regarding unemployed Indigenous Australians, singling out the ones that are no good to themselves and who can't accept things, the half-castes.
The terminology itself, which is documented in the source, is deeply offensive.
It is. And what he proposed was a mechanism for dealing with this group.
The part about doping the water.
His specific proposal was to mandate that this targeted group be forced to collect their welfare checks from a single central location. He then articulated the proposed method for solving what he perceived as the problem.
And his exact words.
The quote is, "And when they had gravitated there, I would dope the water up so that they were sterile and would breathe themselves out in the future, and that would solve the problem."
These statements are direct quotes documented in the source material and illustrate the extreme nature of some of his public policy suggestions late in his life.
Does the source material indicate any immediate political blowback or public condemnation he faced after airing such profoundly chilling views on national television? The sources focus more on the existence of the quote as evidence of his views rather than the immediate public aftermath. However, simply by existing in the public record, these statements illustrate the absolute lack of concern he had for political correctness or social acceptability, driven by his conviction that certain measures were necessary to protect his vision of a resource-driven Australia.
We now turn to the dramatic closing chapter of Lang Hancock's life, which began after the death of his second wife, Hope, in 1983. In the vacuum created by Hope's death, the woman who would soon dominate Australian tabloids arrived, Rose Laxon.
Rose Laxon arrived from the Philippines on a 3-month working visa in 1983. And the extraordinary detail here is that her employment as a maid for the newly widowed Lang Hancock was actually arranged by his daughter, Gina Reinhardt.
A detail that is just so intensely ironic, given the bitter, destructive conflict that would soon erupt between the maid and the heiress.
It's hard to overstate the irony. Hancock and Laxon became romantically involved, leading to their marriage on July 6, 1985 in Sydney. It was the third marriage for both of them.
And the age disparity was enormous.
Huge. It added instant fuel to the controversy. Rose Porteous was 39 years younger than Lang Hancock, who was then in his mid-70s. This vast age gap, combined with his immense wealth, immediately triggered intense public and media speculation.
She was relentlessly accused of being a gold digger.
Relentlessly, and accusations of infidelity were constant. She did attempt to address those public claims directly, though.
What did she say?
She met the sensationalism with a dry, defiant public statement. She was quoted as stating, "I have been accused of sleeping with every man in Australia. I would have been a very busy woman."
And Gina Reinhardt, who was set to inherit the entire estate, did not attend the wedding.
No, she did not, which symbolized the fracture that was now permanent within the family.
Despite the controversies, the sources do suggest that Rose initially provided a boost of energy and youthfulness to the aging magnate.
That's certainly the initial narrative. The sources note that Rose helped Hancock feel younger. She updated his wardrobe, began dyeing his hair to conceal the gray, and encouraged him to discard his cane.
And he was infatuated.
It seems so. He gave her considerable sums of money and investments, including significant real estate holdings in Sydney.
And together, they created a physical monument to their controversial union, a mansion that became instantly notorious.
Prix d'amour, which, when you translate it from French, means price of love.
And it was extravagant.
Immensely.
Yeah.
A sprawling 16-block mansion overlooking the Swan River, famously modeled after Tara, the idealized southern plantation from Gone with the Wind. They used it to host lavish parties, and the couple would dance into the night. It stood as a symbol of over-the-top new money extravagance and girth.
It's incredible. A man who prided himself on rugged, anti-government independence models his house after an idealized southern plantation.
It's a profound irony. The man who advocated for living simply was funding a structure that required enormous upkeep and scale. However, the initial glamour faded.
The relationship broke down.
Severely. Reinhardt would later claim that as the relationship wore on, Porteous paid little attention to his worsening health. Instead, Reinhardt alleged publicly that Rose screeched at him for money. Despite the acrimony, they remained married until his death.
And the public drama was far from over when he died.
Not even close. The aftermath only exacerbated the family conflict. The speed of Rose's next marriage was particularly indignant to Reinhardt. Less than 3 months after Hancock's death, Porteous married for the 4th time to Hancock's longtime friend, William Porteous.
The optics were terrible.
Awful. It added further fuel to the allegations about her motivations. As for the mansion, the symbol of their short marriage, Prix d'Amour, was bulldozed in March 2006.
There's a great anecdote about Hancock's own view of the mansion.
Yes, a friend recalled Hancock himself being somewhat bemused by the sheer scale of the place, noting that he would have been happy sleeping in a transportable. Rose, for her part, was pragmatic, noting she always wanted to live there, but quickly added that she did not want to clean it.
Lang Hancock died in March 1992 at 82 while residing in the guest house of the Prix de Mort complex. His daughter, Gina Reinhardt, immediately issued a statement claiming the death was unexpected.
Yes, unexpected, despite his advanced age, and occurred despite strong will to live. This really framed the subsequent conflict.
Initially, the official findings were straightforward.
They were. An autopsy determined the cause was arteriosclerotic heart disease, essentially natural causes. A police investigation concluded there was no evidence to contradict that finding.
But Gina Reinhardt was unconvinced. Her persistence was relentless, driven by the absolute certainty that her stepmother had unnaturally hastened his death.
And this suspicion launched years of intense, high-stakes legal maneuvering. Reinhardt demanded an official inquiry.
Which was refused at first.
Twice. Two successive state coroners refused to allow an inquest, finding no initial grounds to suspect foul play. However, due to political pressure and Reinhardt's determination, one was finally granted in 1999, 7 years after his death, under the direction of the WA Attorney General, Peter Foss.
The inquest finally began in April 2001 and was instantly sensationalized.
The media coverage was massive. It was expected to call 63 witnesses over 5 weeks, but it was dominated by these highly dramatic claims about the internal workings of the marriage.
What was the main thrust of the testimony?
It was aimed squarely at Rose Porteous. The claim was that Porteous had literally nagged Hancock to death with shrill tantrums and arguments. The court essentially became the venue for a detailed public dissection of their acrimonious relationship.
And Rose Porteous's defense?
She denied the sensational allegations, offering a highly memorable explanation of her courtroom demeanor. For anyone else, it would be a tantrum. For me, it's just raising my voice.
There was one specific critical detail revealed about the very final days of his life that provided an undeniable insight into the conflict.
That detail speaks volumes. The sources reveal that in the last few days of Hancock's life, Rose Porteous was aggressively pressuring him to change his will.
And his response was extreme.
It was. He had taken out a restraining order against her. That action, taken by an 82-year-old man against his wife just before his death, shows the utter deterioration of their relationship.
The inquest itself became so highly charged that it had to be temporarily halted.
Yes, it was put on hold after severe allegations surfaced that Reinhardt had potentially paid witnesses to appear and that some witnesses might have lied or embellished their testimony. This added a layer of profound cynicism to the proceedings.
It eventually resumed.
It did, 3 months later, with a smaller witness list, and finally reached its conclusion.
So after years of campaigning, 2 refused inquests, a public inquiry dominated by sensational claims and allegations of witness tampering, what was the ultimate legal finding?
The inquest concluded definitively that Lang Hancock died of natural causes. The finding was that he died of his pre-existing arteriosclerotic heart disease and not as a result of Porteous's behavior, despite the severe strain she may have placed on him.
So the nagging, however severe, was not legally the cause of death.
That was the finding.
But even with that resolution, the drama continued in the courts over the immense legal costs.
Correct. Rose and William Porteous, having weathered the inquiry, commenced legal action against Reinhardt to recover their substantial legal bill, estimated at $2.7 million. That dispute dragged on for another 2 years.
Until it was settled.
It was eventually settled out of court in 2003, finally bringing an end to the more than decade-long legal and personal conflict that had started the moment the maid married the magnate.
It is essential that the extreme controversies of his later years and the decade of bitter legal battles do not completely overshadow the enduring business legacy he created, which continues to grow through his daughter.
Lang Hancock's vision, his tenacity, and specifically the gigantic resource deposit he secured are the foundation of what has become one of the world's most powerful, privately held mining operations.
And Gina Reinhardt continues to chair Hancock Prospecting,
aggressively expanding mining projects across Western Australia and other states. The financial scale of this continued operation is staggering. The estimated revenue for Hancock Prospecting was about $870 million back in 2011 alone, and this has only ballooned since.
Gina Reinhardt's phenomenal financial position in global wealth rankings is a direct reflection of that iron ore legacy.
Indeed, Reinhardt is consistently ranked as Australia's richest person. For a time, especially around 2012 when commodity prices peaked, she was even listed as the world's richest woman, with a net worth estimated at an incredible $29.17 billion.
And while that has fluctuated,
it has, commodity prices change. By 2019, her wealth had eased to around US $14.8 billion, according to Forbes. But she remains an immensely powerful global financial figure. The entire fortune is fundamentally built on the perpetual royalty stream from the iron ore that her father fought so furiously to discover and monetize.
And his contribution, linking back to the land he knew so intimately, is memorialized not just in financial balance sheets, but in the physical landscape itself.
It's a fitting, lasting physical tribute. The Hancock Range, situated about 65 kilometers northwest of Newman in the Pilbara, commemorates the family's contribution to the establishment of both the pastoral and the mining industry in that crucial region of Western Australia.
Looking back across the scope of Lang Hancock's life, we see an incredible trajectory. From a remote pastoralist and early asbestos prospector to the man who discovered and unlocked the world's largest iron ore deposit, which generated unfathomable wealth.
Hmm.
He weaponized that wealth, pursuing aggressive political influence and challenging the federal government, all while his personal life devolved into an intense public drama that was only resolved by a state inquest.
His story provides a potent, complex case study in the multifaceted impact of resource wealth, the source of which was literally a geological accident exploited through massive political will.
It really forces you to consider some fundamental questions.
It does. Consider how the immense discovery of a single natural resource iron ore could simultaneously fuel one family's colossal fortune, drive national political interference through substantial strategic lobbying and donations, and yet become deeply intertwined with decades of bitter, personal, and legal conflict that played out on a global public stage. What are the true costs of such singular monumental wealth generation, and what level of personal drama and public controversy is inevitably required to follow in its wake?
A compelling question to consider as you reflect on this extraordinary life. Thank you for joining us for this extensive exploration into the life of Lang Hancock. Thanks for listening.